How's it going, everyone? I hope this Thursday is treating you well. Today I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about the 1989 sci-fi horror film The Terror Within. It's directed by Thierry Knotts, written by Thomas M. Cleaver, notably produced by Roger Corman, and stars George Kennedy and Andrew Stevens. This also apparently kicked off a long-running series of collaborations between actor Andrew Stevens and Roger Corman, although I won't pretend to know much of anything about that at this point. I mean, I do know that Andrew Stevens wrote and directed the sequel to this film in addition to starring in it. I'm not sure what to expect there. I mean, that could go one way or the other. I mean, I sort of enjoyed this movie enough on its own terms that I will probably check that sequel out. It's available on TUBI, as is this one. And yes, this is a pretty fun and harmless little piece of late 80s schlock. The plot isn't much more than a hack mashup between Alien and David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly. Right down to a scene that only escapes being a complete and utter ripoff of the chestburster scene from Alien by having the creature burst out of the stomach rather than the chest. They just kind of, dropped it a few inches and voila. If you haven't seen this movie, seriously, go watch it or try to YouTube this scene from it. Like, I'm not exaggerating. It's almost identical. Along with all the stuff that you expect from Alien ripoffs, where you have people slinking through corridors playing hide and seek with a monster in the shadows. There's a plot strand involving a woman who's pregnant and fears that her baby may have been influenced or infected in some way by the gargoyle that is now roaming in the compound. And gargoyles is their name for these mutant monsters, by the way, not mine. I guess before I get too far ahead of myself, I should just briefly mention that this takes place in a post-apocalyptic future on Earth, which basically means that it was cheaper to shoot in the California desert or wherever the heck this was than it was to try and film it in space. I mean, seriously, this whole thing looks like it could have been shot along the beach by my house. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. But you spend so much of the movie in this underground bunker in any case that with a few small edits and maybe a little more budget, you could have set this whole thing in space and nothing about the plot would have really functioned all that differently. But in any case, these gargoyles have apparently wiped out most of humanity, and through circumstances, one of them ends up making its way into this underground bunker because a woman that two scientists on this team rescue is already expecting. Neither the woman herself nor anyone else on this research team seems to be able to comprehend at this point that the gargoyles impregnate women that quickly. I mean, based on what happens with one character, it seems like all it takes is one of these gargoyles clawing a woman to impregnate them, or even to influence a pregnancy that's already in progress. And at one point, a scientist even mentions that the turnaround between pregnancy and birth with these gargoyle fetuses is like, almost 10 times the normal rate. So we've got a bit of that sort of Robin Williams Jack science going on here, which kind of makes me wonder if these things age and develop that quickly, instead of trying to find all these dumb, primitive ways to kill it with like a flamethrower or a knife or a gun or something like that. Why not just get out of the bunker, leave it down there, and, at the rate these things develop, it'll be dead in a month anyway. Just let the thing be. Let it be down there by itself, bumping its head into a wall. Who cares? The look of the gargoyles themselves isn't the worst thing I've ever seen either. I mean, you've got lots of veins and sinew and teeth. It's pretty run-of-the-mill, but it's done with enough sort of graphic novel, comic book, cartoonish style that I had fun with it. Actually, to tell you the truth, what they look like is unfinished gorilla costumes from a Godzilla movie or something. There's some shots where it's not bad, but in some of those sequences where the creature is down on all fours, crawling on its hands and knees through the ventilation shafts, something about that just seems so obviously like a person in a costume that it's very hard to take even the least bit seriously. And of course, there's also the question of how exactly these gargoyles plan to continue reproducing if they wipe out humanity altogether and they have no human hosts to impregnate. I didn't see any reproductive organs on any of these gargoyles, and they don't ever seem to procreate amongst themselves. So as nearly as I can tell, they're just kind of like walking viruses in the flesh, so to speak, that hope that they can find a human woman close by to put a few scratch marks on to, keep the race going, I guess. On top of all of that, the fact that the whole thing is set on a barren wasteland, a barren earth. I mean, Yeah, sheesh. I feel like there's some sort of like, you know, vaguely political subtext to all of this that I'm not getting because I would have barely been 5 years old when this movie was released. Is there someone out there senior to me that can, verify that in any way? Granted, it's hard to imagine them putting too much effort into that kind of a point in a movie that is very clearly made for a niche audience. But it's hard to shake the fact that looking at this through a contemporary lens does make these things stand out a little bit more. Another amusing aspect to this movie is how lightly all the deaths are treated. Right off the bat, two guys from the lab are killed in the opening scene. When two other people go out and find them dead, they have basically no reaction to the fact that these two guys are dead. I mean, presumably they're a pretty tight-knit group at this point, with, most of the people they know probably having been killed off or died. So you would think that there would be some kind of bond there. The characters David and Sue basically acknowledge the death of these two guys as just kind of information and move on to taking care of Karen, the pregnant woman. Not a single person back at the lab ever utters a single mournful expression towards these two guys whatsoever. Then, without getting into every single moment, pretty much everyone in the cast starts dropping like flies, and none of this ever registers with any sort of emotional sincerity with the survivors at any point. Maybe being in a post-apocalyptic future makes you a little bit more sort of desensitized to death and destruction and violence, but I mean, come on. I mean, there can't be too many of you left. Isn't there any sort of attachment there? For that matter, at the end of the movie, when they lure the gargoyles who are outside into the bunker and then detonate a bomb to destroy all of them, David really sits back with his big triumphant grin of relief on his face. And it just feels a little bit weird because, again, this is a post-apocalyptic landscape, as in the apocalypse happened. The whole world as we know it got wiped out. And you've just destroyed, say, maybe 5 of these bastards. If you'd wiped out the gargoyle race altogether, then maybe you have a little bit more right to sit there and flex. But if you've only killed the few that were just hanging out outside your bunker, I think it's a little bit early to be breaking out the champagne, just saying. But you know what? For all my complaining and ribbing at this movie, as far as cheap Alien knockoffs go, this one is one of the more fun ones. If you're the kind of horror fan who has any sort of appreciation for fun schlock, I would say strap in and give this one a whirl if you haven't watched it already. Just fortify yourself with a strong drink and let the good times roll. Just don't expect anything with a lot of brains or originality. And with that, I think I will sign off on this one. Maybe I'll see if I can squeeze the sequel in. Who knows? Other than that, thanks as ever for watching. Stay tuned to the channel for more content soon and have yourselves an awesome day.